It's time for another stupid alien trick. This childish government assassin, evil alien, would often say, "Quit hitting yourself," and then he would slap himself lightly, which would make me slap myself lightly. Remember when you were a kid wrestling with someone stronger than you, and they would grab your arm and make you hit yourself? Yes, the aliens enjoy that game too, and do it remotely. This capability probably inspired the movie Fight Club. EEG heterodyning is the ghost in the military machine. Just in case you are still wondering why we have terrorism at all, or why we are called the Great Satan by many countries, just be reminded of articles published in a major newspaper such as the February 14, 1992 USA Today, who reported allegations by Saddam Hussein that the CIA targeted him. Quote, "The CIA used psychotronics and biocommunication to cause a blood clot in the brain or heart." Unquote. We even have laws that say we cannot assassinate leaders of other countries. We have turned into a criminal state in which Congress is impotent to enforce the laws without an army of their own. Satan, silent assassination through amplified neurons, has many applications for pissing people off and creating lifelong enemies. Even the European Parliament documented this fact about the psychological effects of psychotronics after Desert Storm. Almost every country in the world is aware of the U.S.'s use of psychotronic weapons around the world except U.S. citizens. Sadly, our own government has decided to make us the most uneducated and politically ignorant nation of the so-called first world countries through an embarrassing public education system and perpetual lying to us, quote, due to national security. We have all sorts of laws that say the CIA and NSA can't spy on U.S. citizens and human experimentation is banned. But who can enforce the laws if the executive branch is corrupt, illegitimate, and illegal? The classification of non-lethal directed energy weapons. It is such a joke to call an ineffective killing weapon non-lethal. It is like classifying guns as non-lethal because the bullet doesn't kill the person, it is all the hemorrhaging that does. The bleeding is a secondary effect. EEG cloning and non-lethal directed energy weapons do the same thing, just over a much longer time frame and much more painfully. It is like trying to kill someone with a butter knife. It is more difficult, takes a lot longer, and will hurt a hell of a lot more. There are more system flaws with Tammy. In the world of psychic warfare, things are not black or white. Compatibility of minds, time spent locked on for adapting, a database brain match, and susceptibility of the target to the power levels of directed energy are all factors in the successfulness of a psychic attack. For example, bilingual victims have all reported that if they start speaking another language, the psychic attackers can't understand what they are saying, nor can the artificial intelligence language recognition system correctly predict their sentences. This is only true for fairly fluent people who don't need to translate the meanings of words in their heads. Attacking the chain of command. Let's ponder the power of EEG heterodyning as a weapon. In a hierarchy of command where people cannot question authority, how many people's minds would you have to influence to take control of the whole structure? The answer is one. Everyone else's orders come from him or her. This assumes that no one is bold enough to question the orders, of course. So military command structures are extremely vulnerable to a takeover. There are few safeguards to watch them or question them, especially if the secrecy directive is used. How many people need to be controlled or influenced to take over Congress? How about the judicial branch? Not many. And the whole country would follow suit. The masses might get suspicious if things seem too unusual and not in line with the Constitution. So you might need to take over the media. How many mass news information streams are there? So the Russians were right. If you could control less than 10,000 people, maybe even as few as 2,000 people, you could steer the direction of the whole country. Is it smart to keep this technology a secret from the population so that they can't recognize the symptoms of a takeover? Is it smart to not build zero-emission superconducting shelters in case of an attack on the public? Who is defending us? Why the F do we have a military and security agencies who can't do their jobs? Is it incompetence or treason? Other limitations of TAMI. Remember, that stands for Thought Amplification Mind Interface. When I was brain napped, I was told that I had to slow down my thinking, speak in complete sentences, and think aloud in words. Apparently my brain was of interest because when they EEG cloned my mind onto theirs, they could only pick up vision, sound, and the senses, but not my higher level thoughts. They were interested in mapping my brainwaves more completely to add to their database. Having a fast mind means that there is not time for the amplification of the brain entrainments to be induced in the psychic spy. This is also somewhat true with vision. If one scans the surroundings quickly, the cloner sees a blurring of images. Alright, let's take a humor break. So what's a book about the darkest times in human and American history without some riddles to solve? In the spirit of Batman, where the Riddler tries to mind control the world, I riddle you this. When I began being mind probed and interrogated, I asked for help from every federal government agency. I was concerned that just maybe the Russians were actually behind it, given my background, and would extract the secrets that I hold. I got no response from hundreds of letters, including from the Navy, which I hold the most secrets. So I am their destroyer. Who am I? So why The Matrix? Why was the movie The Matrix called that? Is it a reference to the global grid, to which several colonels I worked with for DARPA projects referred? Isn't the global grid just the Internet of networked information? I believe it is a reference to the image matrix calculated with MRI ESR techniques. Like I mentioned before, I found a Yale professor who has been doing Earth Gauss intensity MRIs since the late 60s. Generally, high-powered superconducting magnets are used in hospital MRIs. This is because they need high-resolution and fast imaging techniques. Under a weak magnetic field, the same principles apply, but the time to acquire an image is greater and the resolution is far less. But you could map out the entire Earth this way, especially if you combine it with radar techniques. Perhaps it is a reference to the matrix algebra that is used for hyper-fast complex algorithms such as calculating a cognitive model of the human brain. Perhaps the movie The Matrix was named from interferometry techniques. If you intersect three perpendicular, coherent, linearly polarized electromagnetic sources, you create a matrix of constructive and destructive interference patterns. Altering the frequencies would cause the matrix to roll or scan, a multi-frequency radar imaging that tries to balance the return signal from all directions of a target by increasing the strength of the signals accordingly would create quote-unquote scalar waves or an invisible electromagnetic interferometric matrix all around the target. Now, if you're following along with a printed copy, you will see a pattern, a diagram of 2-point sources of waves. In this diagram of two-point wave sources, notice the matrix of waves that interfere with each other. And it's also interesting to note that ground-hugging low-frequency waves can travel over the horizon, too. They don't need to just be bounced off the ionosphere. And as a footnote, you should visit the website www.mr-tip.com if you want to learn more about low-field open MRI techniques. Directed energy. There is a medical instrument called the gamma knife, used to focus X-rays from all angles around the head to burn tumors in the brain without cutting open the skull. At the intersection of these gamma rays, the energy is intense enough to kill the tumor cells while harmlessly passing through the other brain matter. Only at the intersection is the combined energy deadly. GPS, Global Positioning System, works on the same principle, except one calculates position from the timing of the satellite pulses, which arrive at slightly different times. Now, again, if you're following along in the book, you will see an image of this gamma knife. And to use a comparison, there's another diagram showing a hemisphere of satellites targeting a house. Now, this orbiting system of satellites, the acronym is called GODS. It stands for Global Orbiting Directed Energy System. And you can imagine the gods in heaven smite the target with a bolt of directed energy. They love their religious themes. You can imagine this like the Death Star from the Star Wars Initiative. So 2 megawatts times 100 satellites and a beam width of 1/100th of the 360 degrees in full circle would equal 454 milliwatts of pulse peak power over a large area. Shrink the beam width to 1/1000th of 360 degrees. That would equal 45 watts of power over that area. This is more than plenty to affect neurons. The Russian Radio Electronics Institute published back in the 70s that with only 10 milliwatts, up to 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared of microwave energy, they observed all kinds of different effects on the firing groups of neurons. Again, this back-of-the-envelope calculation says it is quite possible to have satellite-based neurological weapons. At first blush, it sounded like Star Wars science fiction, didn't it? However, this was just an exercise. Satellites are better sensors than power emitters. It would make more sense to use a giant radar fields known as ionospheric heaters to bounce their phased 10 gigawatt energy fields off the atmosphere back to spots on Earth. Similarly, one could use extremely high-powered directed energy weapons from satellites to converge their energy onto one point using phased array beam steering or high-powered masers. Ignoring the obvious assassination application, it can be used to increase the resolution of MRI, ESR, and other imaging techniques. At the intersection of phase, frequency, amplitude is calculated such that the full energy for a duration of time is maximized in the magnetic field by modulating a very low sideband and destructively heterodyning the beam's high-frequency carriers. During that increased magnetic field, another radio, a higher frequency signal, can be used for the extraction of the electron spins or magnetic nuclei for the relaxation photons to be collected and viewed. This would be better than just using the natural Earth's magnetic field for increased resolution. Seems like another science fiction feat, doesn't it? But just look at the infrared image resolution of the Air Force's AC-130s 5 miles from their targets. This energy is emitted by thermally generated collisions of vibrating molecules without any external energy to excite it. If every valence electron or nucleus could be prodded to give off a photon in a similar fashion, the landscape and people would be easily reconstructible into a three-dimensional image, i.e., Earth-penetrating tomography, an application of the ionospheric heaters. Here is another brain teaser for you. Suppose you have 2 laser beams with perfect monochromatic, which means one frequency, and coherent, which means in phase, wavefronts. The beams each enter a cube made of 2 right-angled prisms. The cube acts to combine the laser beams and project it onto a screen. One laser is moved 1/2 wavelength further from the cube than the other. If one laser is operational, you will see a spot on the screen. But if they are both operational, you will not. Why? Where does the energy go? Why is this relevant? It demonstrates how to make pinpoint high-energy waves anywhere on Earth via directed energy weapons with constructive interference of energy sources. All sorts of interesting effects can be done with these sorts of weapons, from being able to induce electronic machines to behave a certain way, for example, or to destroy their circuitry with a high-powered electromagnetic or microwave pulses. Destructive interference mode beams, like in the laser example I just mentioned, create, quote, scalar waves that can travel tremendous distances with high-intensity fields without burning the object of interest and reflect back with tremendous signal-to-noise ratio. And I'll talk about that much more detail later. So let's turn it up a notch. Let's hyper-geek the concepts behind the most top-secret global human surveillance and manipulation systems. And we have to understand a few different military imaging technologies. Synthetic aperture radar and beam steering. All these concepts of directed energy are just rebranding marketing jargon for half-a-century-old concepts, except with more power. Grids of transducers or antenna can shape the wavefront by phase controlling the individual elements in the grid. The beam can be shaped wider by using lower frequency or narrow by using higher frequencies. It can be steered 360 degrees, and its intensity, whether in constructive or destructive modes, can be controlled. The carrier signals in the beams can be modulated and shaped with ELF, which stands for extremely low frequency waves, or heterodyne into high frequency side lobes. That is it behind the concepts of scalar scatter radar and directed energy systems. Time reverse echo. Time reverse echo is a technique which can be used to send back a signal to the source, even if the location of the source is undetermined due to multiple reflections. By using a phased arrays of microphones or antenna, the signal is collected and rebroadcast in the reverse time sequence the signal arrived. The phased array signal will bounce off all the same structures to combine and arrive at the source at the same time. If you amplify the return signal, you could potentially attack a signal source this way once it is identified from a signature. This technique was written about in Scientific American, and the principle would probably work in any medium. One could envision arrays of transducers on the ocean floor that could send out jamming sonar or high-powered directed sonic waves that would deafen occupants and submarines listening to ocean sounds, shake the hull of the water vessel, create cavitation in the turbines to stall it or act like a lithotripter, and from a calculated energy propagation or resonance pattern of directed mechanical energy to locations within the water vessel vehicle to cause structural or mechanical failure. I've never heard many research in this area of directed pressure waves as a weapon, but maybe that's what has been causing so many whales to beach themselves. Neuronal amplification technology. It was discovered back in the 1920s that neurons could be influenced by electromagnetic induction. This technology has been held in the strictest top-secret clearance government labs since then, as it was developed. Only now are universities exploring it as a tool for curing depression and quelling the voices of schizophrenics. Yale and the University of Pennsylvania, for example. The population was being prepped for the human efficacy trials even as far back as the 1960s. The television series The Outer Limits features mind control, synthetic telepathy, and evil alien experimentation in almost every episode. It is simply easier for people to cope with the idea of evil aliens than high treason and being betrayed by the government of a country that they are ready to die for to uphold the ideals of the doctrines. The mass programming through popular media has continued to this day to seed the ideas that these high technology experiments of mind are conducted on behalf of a secret evil alien plot. I've tried my best to avoid scientific details of these technologies that are often ungraspable by the general public, but at this time we must use the magnifying glass to examine the details to garner clues to solve the world's biggest mystery. In this case, we need to scrutinize the psychophysics term of choice. Choice occurs at the moment of neuron depolarization. It is the summation of synaptic potentials at the hillock, which determines whether a depolarization is warranted. I will read a footnote now. As a reminder, the hillock is the junction of the neuron that sums the action potentials and determines whether an axial depolarization will occur. It manifests itself as a nonlinear sigmoidal function of action potentials from the synaptic connections, including inhibitory as well as excitatory connections. There are a plethora of biological mechanisms which can be affected by electromagnetic forces that would alter this moment of choice, affecting the neurotransmitter release, voltage potential across the membrane, the voltage-sensitive organelles on the cell membrane responsible for conductance, or any ionic current flow in the biochemical mechanisms would achieve the desired neural influence. Remember that biochemical sensitizers can increase the electromagnetic influence in these mechanisms. The key to influencing a neuron and the entire informational structure of the mind is in the timing of the pulses of the electromagnetic signals. Using just EEG probes is generally not enough to determine the timings. One needs to precisely time each neuron's interaction with the next throughout the whole structure of the moment of choices. This is why electromagnetic energy doesn't send everyone into seizures. It is only in the informational coherence of the signal specific to each individual that matters. Everyone has different axon lengths and hence timings of potential amplification of external electromagnetic influence. This is the reason that the ever-growing database of TAMI must be maintained for maximal effectiveness on the world's population. The synapse of a neuron has been analogized to Medusa's head. It looks like a bunch of snakes extruding from the body of the neuron. So be careful not to stare directly at this science, or you will be turned to stone, menticized like a zombie. And this is a warning to other neuroscientists. Those that study this field outside government labs often become zombified. Neurotransmitter release with specific frequencies and power levels. So for argument's sake, let's say that the Air Force documents that I publish in the appendix of this book are true and not meant to look like an accidental misclassification of a top secret weapon, and the Russian literature from their radio and electronic institutes are true too. Then neurotransmitter release occurs at specific power absorption and under certain frequencies. EEG heterodyning, which causes neuron amplification, could be done in this way. So why are certain people chosen around the world for these endless tortures and extermination? Directed energy might work like the Stanford gamma knife. Only at the intersection of several power pulses does the neurotransmitter release occur. Perhaps certain individuals exceed an allowable sensitivity that is used for communicating with spies and need to be terminated for that reason. Perhaps everyone is monitored by a specific program, and those that get classified as, quote, psychics become too sensitive and start picking up other people's monitoring signals or programs and need to be terminated or psychotronically imprisoned for that reason. It is only speculation what the rationale the traitors use to justify why they do this, but the illusion of freedom is crumbling. No illusion is 100% containable. Perhaps we are chosen on the human surveillance global grid as one of the 1,000 points of light to be human property of the DoD. If Congress were to order another independent investigation, as has been done several times in the past, documents would be shredded and the cowards scrambling to the shadows. All the countries in the world need to stand up and say enough is enough. We will not allow you to pick us off one by one like cattle with your mind-control weapons, manipulate our politics, instigate wars, just so the machine can justify growth like a cancer over the planet. Many will have trouble accepting this basic research, but it does not detract from the truth of it. The educated will at least see the plausibility of it, and if they have time, investigate it further. In a nutshell, direct the energy for the correct power level, time the pulses to the individual's cognitive model for synaptic transmission in the state-dependent time sequence. Why is this concept so difficult for academics to understand and catch up with the aliens in their research? Brain-reading satellites and ionospheric heater radar fields. To give you an idea of power density and sensitivity of instruments, let's consider an FM radio station 20 miles away emitting 50 kilowatts of power. The receiver would only measure 2.1 times 10 to the minus 5 watts per meter squared. That's what your car radio receives, demodulates, and amplifies for your listening pleasure. A 1 terahertz sub-millimeter wavelength radio antenna, such as the 10-meter Heinrich Hertz telescope, can view a typical radio source intensity of 10 to the minus 26 watts per meter squared through the Earth's atmosphere. Do you still believe that radar brain resonances cannot be read by satellite radio telescopes? How the electromagnetic sensing systems work together. Any ground-based network like HARP, Gwen, cell phone towers, or the Russian woodpecker system could also perform this feat of mind reading and control, but not on a global scale, only through the hundreds of spy and remote sensing satellites circling the Earth and the tens of giant ionospheric phased array fields. Could you cover the entire globe with directed energy weapons in the subclass of mind control weapons? Imagine a steerable beam using a phased array of transmitters. This is similar to a mechanical method of using a mirror to deflect laser beam, like for laser light shows, except it requires no moving parts. The intensity of the beam and all other participating satellites' beams can converge on one spot, or many spots, simultaneously. This would be directed energy whose intensity is supposed to be enough to fry the electronics and anything not radiation-hard shielded. That is the government standard. It might heat a human being, but I don't believe the effects can be made immediately lethal by the thermal effects alone. Otherwise, Saddam Hussein would not have complained about the biocommunication-directed energy weapon torturing him in 1992. He would have been fried like the rest of us. But torture just pisses people off if they can't kill you through menticide. Notice how we had to fight another war after we used it on him. The European Parliament commented on the non-lethal and mind control weapons in general and stated they need to be banned because they only instigate wars and increase violence. The U.S. refuses to sign any treaties or acknowledge them to their own citizens. Welcome to the land of freedom, where you are free to believe all the lies your government tells you. The grid of satellites in the hemisphere or the ionospherically reflected ground-based mile-wide antenna fields can be used in a time-slice manner or calculate an inverse Fourier transform to attack many people at the same time without exposing too many others to the same intensity and frequencies. All the sensor systems are integrated to act as one single antenna or phased array. This allows the linked system to redirect energy from almost any angle to find a weakness in a shielded structure. Remember in the Moloch patent it said that the frequencies are between 10 megahertz and 40 gigahertz could be used for mind-reading radar. That's a huge range and may extend even higher in the spectrum. Different frequencies have different ability to penetrate different materials and structures. Full spectrum radar sends a broadband ping across all frequencies like a flash of white light from a camera and records all the returns across the area. Each person has a unique set of frequencies that they will absorb or return to the sensor arrays. This uniquely identifies everyone. Based on autocorrelation techniques, one can determine the optimal route and frequencies to be emitted by the phased arrays of antenna to optimally modulate the brainwaves of the target. By finding the weaknesses, the shielding, or barriers by using any frequency or path, there would be few defenses against a nervous system disruptor that targets individuals. When Dan Rather was beaten up by directed energy weapon torture victims, they kept asking him, "What is the frequency, Kenneth?" Everyone looks for the frequencies that the illegitimate CIA and DoD elements are using to torture them, but it is nearly impossible to isolate them with a budget under $1 million, especially if they can use narrowband or broadband in such a large spectrum. The patent claims you can use pulse or continuous wave. It would be easy to devise a frequency hopping scheme so that the pattern would not stand out, or use what's called deterministic broadband noise to diabolically hide the informational coherence. On top of that, who would recognize brainwaves modulated into a frequency hopping scheme anyway? We are bathed in electromagnetic energy, and I have yet to see a successfully built full-spectrum anechoic EM chamber. So what other advantages do scalar waves have? They can penetrate materials to a greater degree since the electromagnetic energy doesn't get absorbed by the surfaces. Remember that electromagnetic waves reflect, scatter, get absorbed, or transmit through any material with these different parameters. A perfect scalar wave will have no absorption in the material, so more will get through and allow one to penetrate to greater depths with high-energy radar. Some refer to this as ground-penetrating radar or scatter radar. Why is it difficult to detect scalar waves? They exist as pure field potential. Some call this a gravity wave. Separating the sources of the interference requires a radio telescope with enough resolving power. There are other techniques that disinformers and Tesla junkies call free energy machines that try to extract the scalar wave energy in which the global surveillance system bathes our planet. The extra energy the humans absorb is only supposed to increase the risk of cancer by 5%. You do the math of how many people the aliens are killing each year while watching and so-called protecting us. And in the book, there's a diagram of what a scalar wave looks like. So the question that it raises is, do the energy sensors still pick up an object in an interference fringe? With just one source alone, they would. People might believe that you could penetrate solid objects this way if it didn't interact with the object. If the scalar field can penetrate the shielding, this would be a large distance quantum tunneling effect. This is an outstanding question for the scientific community for civilian defenses. This is the basis of the top secret scalar weapons that so many disinformation agents confusing people in the scientific community, and are the basis for romanticizing and silently assassinating people without easily being detected. So I will leave the answer for you to discover it on your own. Get a laser and create a Michelson interferometer whose beams completely interferes with each other destructively. Place a photodiode in the path or a piece of film and see what happens. Now place a piece of thin black film at the perfectly destructive interference path and measure the intensity at different points behind it. That will answer whether the photons can penetrate a shield, while the waves seem to be non-existent because of averaging. Stealthy, isn't it? This is the paradox between waves and photons that baffle our intuitive senses. Interfacing Tammy. Tammy's interface has 3 screens for the operator. The interface uses an eye tracker instead of a mouse, keyboard, or touchscreen. Tammy's operator needs only look at one spot on the screen for a second, then a drop-down X-Windows-driven menu system allows the operator to traverse the options merely by looking at them. It turns out to be a very efficient way to operate the program. The developers experimented with voice recognition, but this turned out to have some issues with covertness. The eye tracking system is also necessary in light of the fact that an EEG clone target would catch on more quickly what was happening to them if they were tapping their fingers all the time. Instead, the extra eye movement has already been covered up by the strategic disinformation agents in the psychology community. I found a paper that said people who are schizophrenic have a very unusual extra rapid eye movement. Nicely done, agents. The left screen shows the operator's brain frequency energy spectrum next to the targets, and underneath is the combine. The center screen is used to select the tortures and other brain modulation scenarios. The third screen is workspace and used for the psychic training games I described earlier, or the truth detector brain printing analyzer program. And if you look at the book, you'll see screenshots of the Tammy's interface. Alright, time for another stupid alien trick. We've covered a lot of science, but we had to get through it so that the doubt is removed that this weapon system exists. We can move on to the more important implications of it on society. Let's take a break for a moment and watch the fools entertain us. We're going to crush your head and punch you in the stomach, the agents say. I feel head pressure and a nauseating wrenching in my gut. They tell me that their heads hurt because they squeeze too hard. Where can you find so many dumb aliens that would hurt themselves in order to hurt others? I'll give you one guess where mindless obedience comes from. Scalar weapons, creating high-intensity, extremely low-frequency magnetic and electric fields through heterodyning high-frequency directed energy weapons. This is a trick that seems quite astounding when you see it. That is the ability to direct energy, enough energy, at an extremely low frequency to spin a compass needle or create a voltage gradient seemingly out of thin air. We intuitively think that there needs to be a near-field physical object present to create the kind of magnetic or electric field strength to accomplish this. But with the giant ionospheric heaters, phased array fields, this feat can be done. Puerto Rico's and Brazil's are very much within range and operational within the time frame that most ships and planes were lost in the Bermuda Triangle. During the past century, more than 50 ships and 20 aircraft sailed into oblivion in the area known as the Devil's Triangle, Bermuda Triangle, and Hoodoo Sea. The satanic cults or naval weapons testers have been operating for a long time, conducting warfare exercises on their own ships and civilian crafts. Here is how I believe the scalar-directed energy weapons can spin a compass needle. During the heaviest attacks by the ghosts, I say sarcastically, they actually spun several compasses, needles, 360 degrees. They quit demonstrating this trick once I set up Hall-effect high-sensitivity magnetic sensors around my house to record the fields 24 hours a day. I have a video of a compass needle oscillating 45 degrees from true magnetic north at roughly 0.3 hertz for 10 minutes. Let's simplify the model to get a better grasp of it. If you created two beams from two beam-steered phased array fields, which bounce their very intense UHF beams off the ionosphere to intersect in an area the size of a small neighborhood block, you would have roughly 10 gigawatts of energy to work with. You can only create tight beams with high frequencies. Raw, low-frequency emitters create very wide beams. This is true for sound waves as well. But you can create a mixed or heterodyne intersection point that has very low frequencies if the high frequencies are exactly canceled out. This is how directional ultrasonic heterodynic sound projection is done, to project a voice into one's head with sound waves without the person next to them hearing it. So one high-powered UHF beam contains the very low frequency information, and the other just contains the same UHF carrier without the low frequency component, but it is 180 degrees out of phase at the intersection point. What is left is an extremely low frequency, high intensity magnetic and electric field that seems to come out of thin air and be directionless, i.e. a scalar field. But in fact, it does have direction, it just can't easily be measured. If airplanes still use compasses rather than laser gyroscopes to fly, they could be disoriented and made to crash this way, or ships go off course. But the Bermuda Triangle seems to have quit taking lives once GPS and gyroscopic navigation instruments have been the common instrumentation method. Of course, GPS signals could be fooled by these kind of signal attacks too. Gyroscopes are immune to these directed energy attacks. As a good college-level physics problem, I will leave the math up to the reader. What is the power required to counter the Earth's natural magnetic field of 0.5 Gauss over a neighborhood block? Determine the low-frequency power component of a high-intensity UHF signal modulated with it. You will find that it falls well within the upper bounds of the so-called ionic spheric heater phased array high-powered directed energy fields. For more advanced students, write your own Maxwell equation solver. You might want to use the numerical approximation method of finite differential time domain, FDTD, to do it. Run the simulations as described above to simulate scalar interferometry and convince yourself that it can be done at these power levels. Let's say that Colonel Thomas Bearden's gravity wave, quote, free energy device that collected 75 watts of power was 100% efficient and used a 1 square foot gravity wave collection dish, which is about the area of the head and body viewed from above. That means the average scalar scatter radar energy passing through a person is roughly 70 milliwatts per centimeter squared. That is exactly the range the Russian university papers describe altering neuronal group firings, coincidentally. And for the professional physicist, estimate how many coulombs of gyro-synchronized electrons are needed per unit area under 70 milliwatts per centimeter squared intensity radar beam to read the bioelectric field given a known noise background and an antenna field the size of a heart. Next, how many electrons need to be jostled to disable this surveillance technology, and at what rate? You can see why plasma research is so popular at NASA and DARPA. This is very good evidence that while satellites could perform the same trick, they would have difficulty generating that kind of power continuously from solar cells. This is extremely good news for the thousands that are tortured by these systems each year. And you should see the section on anti-psychotronic theory for more details. That means the killing signals have an exact direction that can be calculated by ray tracing your location to the ionosphere back to the 4 or 5 directed energy antenna fields, aka over-the-horizon radar systems. Those are the directions you want to block to weaken the nervous system disruptor or the surveillance system's secondary effects for, quote, electrically sensitive individuals. Hiding the scalar killing signals, i.e., what the military calls low probability of interception radar. Not only do the scalar waves look like they're coming out of nowhere, the carrier frequency can be what is called deterministic broadband noise. It will appear like regular noise to an amateur, signal analyst looking at an oscilloscope or spectrum analyzer. The background noise levels will be just a bit higher, and most amateur radio engineers do not keep measurements on the absolute background noise levels. This very complex broadband carrier wave will be canceled out at the point of intersection of scalar wave anyway. So this is how you can hide the carrier wave of the signal in noise, and hide the direction and carrier wave frequencies of the signal with heterodyning destructive interference, i.e. scalar waves. The reverse is true too. You can create a high-frequency coherent signal at the intersection of directed energy wavefronts that would increase the bandwidth by the addition of the frequency sources. This too could be a combination of several deterministic broadband noise signal carriers. If one signal was intercepted, it would appear like noise. Only at the intersection of the many signal sources can the message be deciphered, and will be automatically decoded through nature's signal addition, arriving at the correct time, phase, and amplitude. So the upper bounds of the bandwidth of the cyclotronic attack signals would be the maximum frequency that can be bounced off the ionosphere at the angle from the 3 or 4 radar fields added together.